Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today, we're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. Hunt, who, at the time with which we're concerned, was employed by the BBA. So, before we go any further, I'm going to check that we have got Mr. Hunt here with us. Mr. Hunt, good morning. Can you see me and hear me?
Good morning, sir. Yes, I can.
Very good. Thank you very much. And you and others will like to know that I'm joined, as usual, by the other panel members, Ms. Thuria Estefan and Mr. Ali Akbar.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good. Now, before we continue your evidence, Mr. Hunt, I think we better just go through the usual housekeeping arrangements. Can you confirm, please, that you're on your own in the room from which you're giving evidence?
I am.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you don't have any documents or other materials with you?
I don't.
And finally, can you confirm that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you which is capable of receiving messages?
Yes, no, I don't have any device.
Good, thank you very much. Well, the procedure today will be the same as it was yesterday. We'll be looking to have a break sometime during the morning, probably around about 11:15, but we'll see how your evidence is going for the precise timing. And unless there's anything you'd like to raise, is there?
No, thank you, sir. That's fine. I think my screen is just, I'm a slightly small screen. So
right, well, if you rest your cursor in the top right-hand corner of the picture,
yes.
You should have a button that says View.
Yes.
You press that, you should be offered full screen.
Yes.
If you click on that, you should get full screen.
That's right. Thank you. Yes, I'm back on full screen. Thank you.
You're back in the picture. Good. All right. Well, now I think if there's nothing you want to raise, I'll invite Ms. Troop to put some more questions to you. Yes, when you're ready, Ms. Troop.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, can you see and hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Good. We were talking yesterday afternoon about the particular wording which appears on page 1 of issue 1 of the BBA certificate for K15. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
The particular wording was the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. So keeping that wording in mind, can we go please to BBA 30/11287? This is a letter from the Loss Prevention Council to the BBA, and we can see from the top section that it's dated the 13th of July 1994. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
We can also see that the subject of the letter is Cooltherm K8 cavity boards, yes?
Yes.
Mr. Hunt, this letter was exhibited to the second witness statement of Brian Moore of the BBA, and he told us that it was one of the documents on which he thought the assessment of K15 by the BBA in 2008 was based, all right? It was on the K15 file, Mr. Moore told us.
Okay.
So if we go down, please, to just scroll down on page 1, we can see at the heading number 1, objective, that the objective is to evaluate test data relating to K8 cavity boards. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And if we go over, please, to page 3, the section I want you to look at with me is at 4, examination of draft certificate. So at the top of the page, and I'm just going to read the first part of that with you. It reads, based on the examination of the context of use specified in your draft certificate, we do not believe that the product will make a significant contribution to a developing fire. And then it goes on with some other details. My first question is this: have you seen this letter previously?
I think I might have done at the time. I don't have a very clear memory of it, no. But I think I may well have seen it at the time.
At what time? At the time of reviewing the certificate for approval?
Yes. So I think that is very likely. I can't absolutely confirm that based on memory, but it is very likely. Yeah.
I see. And given that answer, that it's very likely that you did see it, although I appreciate that you're saying you can't remember for certain, why would you have been looking at this letter in the context of approving a certificate for Kingspan's K15? What would be the relevance of this letter from 1994 about K8 boards? Do you know?
Well, I think, I mean, it may have been because it was related to other cool therm, the family of cool therm phenolic insulation boards.
I see.
And I think the document you showed me yesterday from the early time of when the project was first sort of kicked off, there seemed to be some mention there of relationship between other cool therm products.
There did, but obviously when you came to approve the certificate, that was 4 years later, yes, in 2008 or thereabouts.
Yes, it was, yes.
All right, just looking at the first 3 lines of section 4 of this document, which I've just read to you, do you agree with me that the wording there bears some similarity to the wording we were looking at yesterday afternoon, which appears under key factors assessed on page 1 of the certificate for K15?
Yes, it does.
Do you think it is possible, or do you know whether it could be this wording, which was used for drafting the wording we were looking at yesterday on page 1 of the K15 certificate?
Yes, it could have been. I don't recollect that clearly and sort of unequivocally, but I think, I mean, it could well have been, yes.
I see. All right. Let's go back to issue 1 of the certificate now, please. That's BBA 6038. And I want to turn with you now, Mr. Hunt, to section 7, which is the section about behaviour in relation to fire. So if we can go to page 5, please. The section, yes, thank you. So there is the section behaviour in relation to fire. And I want to look with you first at what is said about the first test listed there, a test to BS 8414 Part 1, 2002. I'm not going to go through it all, it's quite dense and there's a lot of detail in it, but do you see that essentially what is set out are some details of the system tested?
Yes, I do.
Can we go, please, to the very last section of that fairly big paragraph about the 8414 test? So if you look 3 lines from the bottom of that paragraph, at the very end of the 3rd line up from the bottom, starting within, do you see that?
Yes, I do.
So we'll read that. Within the stated test time, the temperature at the level 2 thermocouples did not exceed 600 degrees, therefore displaying limited fire spread away from the fire source, and that the product meets the criteria stated within BRE 135. Yes?
Yes.
That assertion that the product meets the criteria in BR 135 is inaccurate, is it not?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, you told us yesterday, and we can go to it in the transcript if we need to, that your knowledge of BS 8414 as a test series in 2008 did extend to an understanding that 8414 was a system test. You were quite clear yesterday. You said that it wasn't a test of a component, but of a whole external wall arrangement. Do you remember?
Yes, yes, I do.
That being the case, do you accept that it is inaccurate to state that a product meets the criteria in BR 135?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
But what is the doubt in your mind about that?
I just have, I'm not so familiar with the standard and the criteria at this time to be able to, without going back through the standards in detail. But
you don't need to do that, Mr. Hunt. What I'm asking you is about your understanding at the time. And unless I'm mistaken, you told us very clearly yesterday that your knowledge did encompass an understanding that 8414 was a system test.
Yes.
If that is true, this is not really a matter of fire expertise, it's a matter of reading. If that is true, it cannot be correct to state that a product meets the criteria in BR 135, can it?
No.
So can you accept that that assertion is inaccurate?
Yes.
It's a fundamental error, carrying an obvious risk of misleading the reader, isn't it?
It could be, yes, it could be misread.
Well, forgive me, what do you mean it could be misread? Reading it as it is written, it tells us that a product has met the criteria in BR 135, and we know, and you knew at the time, that a product cannot do that. How else could it be read?
I think, it could be read that it's the product that this insulation product within that system. I accept system test, but obviously this certificate relates to the insulation board as a product. So therefore the product within the system met the criteria on that particular test assembly.
Yes. So you're saying that you think readers might have looked at that and thought, I'd better add in the words, the product within a system meets the criteria within BR 135, are you?
I think so, yes. I think without knowing exactly how I would have read it at the time, I think that's how I would have read it.
Why doesn't it simply say that then?
I don't know. That would have been a useful clarification.
Well, it would have been an accurate clarification. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Yes. How did you miss that, Mr. Hunt?
I don't know. I can't account for that. It's something I should have spotted.
Yes. All right. Let's move on, please. I want to go back with you to your witness statement. So BBA 3011087 and to page 14. Thank you. You're asked there, if we go to the top. Yes, I'm so sorry. If we look at, do you see B, which is the third paragraph down, you've been asked, was a BR 135 classification report sought by the BBA from Kingspan in respect of the test to BS 84141 2002 referred to at section 7.1? And your answer is, I don't know, and I have not seen any evidence on file. Yes?
Yes.
All right. Well, to save us some time, I can tell you that no such report existed in 2008.
Okay.
Are you able, therefore, to tell me how did the BBA establish from the BS 8414 test data it had that system had met the criteria in BR 135?
I think, I can't again be absolutely sure of this, but I think at the time George Lee would have gone through the test report and the criteria in BR 135 and looked at whether those criteria were met or not.
I see. Do you consider that he was qualified to do that in 2008?
I think I think we might have touched on this yesterday. I don't think he had any formal competencies in fire.
Yes, I remember that. My question is, do you think he was qualified in 2008 to assess BS 8414 test data against the criteria in BR 135?
Only in respect of being a a technical person who would have read through the reports and the standards and come to a conclusion on that, but not if there was any competencies needed in judgments that were not clear from those reports.
I see. Did you also go through that exercise when you came to review what Mr. Lee had done? Did you go through the 8414 test data and carry out some sort of exercise to assess whether or not you considered that it met the criteria in BR 135?
I don't remember doing that specific. I don't have a clear memory of doing that.
Right.
I think George would have run through it with me, the criteria, but I cannot recall that specifically. I can't put my finger on a particular instance of that.
All right. Do you consider that you would have been qualified to carry out that assessment against the criteria in BR 135 in October 2008?
Again, if it was a question of just reading the standard and the test and it was a fairly straightforward conclusion, I think then obviously any relatively technical person could do that. Again, if some judgment was needed, probably not.
I see. All right. As far as you're aware, let's explore this. Was the assessment of BS 8414 test data in general against the criteria in BR 135 a normal or regular occurrence for the BBA in October 2008? Was it something that was done regularly?
I don't recall. I think in my experience, which I think as we established yesterday is limited on insulation products at that time, I can't think of another instance of it. Whether that was done on other products prior to my involvement.
Well, don't worry too much about what was done prior to your involvement. Let me put it in this way. Do you remember ever yourself carrying out an exercise in which you looked at BS 8414 test data and assessed that data against the criteria in BR 135 at any time for any product?
I can't recall another such product. No.
All right. Let's take a look at what Mr. Lee has to say about this in his witness statement. If we can go, please, to BBA 30-10794 and to page 6. Right. If we look, please, this is a little bit tricky because the inquiry's questions are not included in the statement. So I'll need to explain to you what the question was. If we look at paragraph 44A, please, I can tell you, and hopefully we don't need to go to it, that the question he had been asked and is answering at 44A was this: has the BBA at any stage been an organisation accredited by UCAS or any other accrediting body to classify BS 8414 test data to BR 135? All right, so that's the question he was being asked. And his answer comes at paragraph 44A, and he says this: not to my knowledge. At the time of my employment, this would be the reason to obtain a fire opinion, as the BBA were not accredited to interpret fire data. Do you agree with that, Mr. Hunt?
I think so. Yes, yes, I think so. I don't remember George saying that at the time.
Don't worry about whether or not he said that to you at the time. I think my question is as basic as this. You were the head of approvals between 2007 and 2010. was the BBA during that period accredited to interpret 8414 test data against BR135 or not?
Okay. I don't believe the BBA was accredited, in terms of UCAS accreditation to make that judgment.
I see.
However, UCAS accreditation is not, at that time, and I think probably now at BBA, is not necessarily required for every judgment and activity that the BBA would undertake, I don't think, certainly at that time. So whether accredited is necessary is one part of the issue, I think. If the other part of it, should a fire opinion, I think at least it should have gone internally to
we'll come on
by Brian Haynes, and then if necessary out to an external body.
Let's deal with that now. Forgive me. Did you say that you think if necessary it should have gone to Brian Haynes and then to an external body?
No, I think it probably should have been referred to Brian Haynes. Now, whether it was at the time, I can't remember.
No, Mr. Hunt, I'm so sorry. Just so that I don't become confused, what do you think should have been referred to Brian Haynes?
Oh, okay. The judgment against BR135.
I see.
The interpretation of the test data, I think it would have been the practice, shall we say, at the time to have done that.
We'll come on to that now.
Oh, okay.
Right. Let's go to BBA 50255, please. We can see an email at the top from George Lee to Brian Haynes, with you copied in, dated the 9th of June 2008. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And the subject is Cooltherm K15 BS8414 test report. And we can see that the test report is attached. Do you see that?
Yes,
I can tell you that 220876 is the test reference number for that test. Mr. Lee says there, "Hi Brian, please find attached product description and 8104 fire report for which I require a fire opinion. Let me know if you require any further info." Yes?
Yes.
Mr. Hunt, we cannot find any response to that email. Can you remember whether or not there was one?
Sorry, I can't. I think that email, which I don't recall precisely from the time, but that if you like is the sort of email I'd expect to see. That it would. Yes. Here's the test report. It may require a fire opinion. So that I think would have been normal. Yes.
Yes. So here it is, and what we can't work out was whether or not a fire opinion was provided. Can you help us with that?
I'm sorry, I can't. I think that's one thing that I've been trying to rack my brains about as to what, whether that happened and if so, what the outcome was. But I cannot recall anything from the time, I'm afraid.
Yes, I see. If a fire opinion had been provided, would it have been in writing?
It may have been, or it may have been done via phone call. But generally speaking, you'd expect something in writing. But I think it depends on. I'm speculating here, which I know perhaps is not right, but I'm suspecting there may have been conversations, with Mr. Haynes from George, and
right.
But what happened after that, I cannot remember.
All right, thank you. Let's move back to the certificate, please, and move on with section 7. If we can go back to issue 1 at BBA 6038 and back to page 5, please. I want to look with you, please, at section 7.2, which is at the very end of the page. If we read that, the product is classified as class 0 or low risk, as defined in the documents supporting the national building regulations. The product, therefore, may be used in accordance with the provisions of, and if we go over, please, to page 6, England and Wales, approved document B, paragraph 8.4, volume 1, and paragraphs 12.5 and 12.6, volume 2. See also diagram 40. Just stopping there, can you help us with this? What fire test data was provided by Kingspan prior to your approval of this certificate to evidence the assertion that K15 was classified as class 0?
I don't, based on memory, I don't remember clearly from the time. I think based on what has been seen on the files more recently as part of for the inquiry, is that there's no test reports that are specific to K15
Right.
found on the file.
All right, yeah. For a BBA certificate to state that a product is classified as class 0, as this one does, would you expect there to have been supplied to the BBA test data evidencing that assertion?
Yes, either directly on that product or possibly a related product.
All right. Could you help me with how test data on a related product could assist with a classification on a different one?
I think if it was the part of the same product family, and depending on the materials and the surface, I know these insulation boards have a core and then have facings.
Yes. So depending on whether it was in the same family, I'm not sure I follow. Let me put it in a different way. Can you explain to me the process of looking at test data from a different product, let's say K8, how from that could the BBA come to a conclusion that a wholly different product called K15 has a classification to class 0? Just help me with what the steps are that take you from the beginning to the end of that.
So I can't remember in detail what those would be. I think probably from time, based on time, it's a long time ago, and I don't know. They certainly don't know the standards well enough now. Quite what my knowledge of the standards was at the time. I'm not.
No, that's fine. I'm not asking.
I would imagine, and this is me talking now, and therefore, you know, is just based on perhaps what I would imagine would happen is it would be looking at the facing material and the core of the board, and if those were essentially, now you might want to define what essentially is, but they were either identical or similar enough to say that the same classification might be appropriate.
It's a bit tricky, isn't it? Because you're talking about something that you say you would imagine might have happened. Let's go back to the beginning of this. Did you ever, during the period that you were head of approvals, carry out an exercise in which you looked at test data for one product, establishing a classification to class 0, and somehow concluded from that another product had that classification too? Did you ever carry out that exercise?
I don't remember carrying out that exercise personally, no.
Who do you say would have done that if that occurred?
I mean, generally, I think at that time, it would have been George Lee initially as the project manager, and possibly with the involvement of Brian Haynes. I
see. All right. I think we'll come back to that. Can we go, please, to your witness statement, BBA 30-11087, and to page 11. You've been asked there, if we look, please, at paragraph 46 and the question above it at F, what evidence did the BBA possess or see prior to the 27th of October 2008, which would or could lead to an assertion that K15 was a product which could be described as class naught? And your answer was, I don't remember. However, I have inspected technical literature dated May 2007, provided to me by the BBA, and note on the front page that it describes it as class naught, and this is also mentioned at page 6 of the same document. Yes?
Yes.
You're talking here, in fact, I think, about Kingspan's marketing literature for K15, are you?
Yes, that was on the file that I saw more recently.
Yes.
When
all right, let's take a
witness statement.
All right, let's take a look at that. It's KIN 402580, please. So this is the 7th issue, if you look to the top right-hand corner of the document, of Kingspan's product literature for K15, and it's dated May 2007. Do you see that?
Yes, yes, I do.
I think this is the document you're referring to.
I believe so, yes.
All right. If we look on the right-hand side at the second red bullet point down, we can see there the words class naught, low risk fire rating. Yes?
Yes.
And then if we go on in this document, please, to page 6, and look at the left-hand side, under the heading Fire Performance, about halfway down the page, we see that claim repeated. Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board will achieve the results given below, which enable it to be classified by the building regulations as being class naught and as low risk. Yes?
Yes.
While we're on it, if we go a little further down that section, do you see that under the sort of shaded blue box, there are a list of tests on the left-hand side?
Yes.
And the very last one is BS 8414 2002, I'm so sorry. Do you see that?
Yes, I do, yes.
The test method is set out on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, opposite that, we see the following words: successfully tested. Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board does not contribute to fire propagation spread within a cladding system. Yes?
Yes.
And under that, K15 meets the criteria within BR 135, and it gives us the standard, and is therefore acceptable for use above 18 meters in accordance with the building regulations. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Just so that I'm clear, I understand that you tell me that this document was on the K15 file and that you saw it in the course of preparing your witness statement. Did you see it at the time you were reviewing this certificate for approval? Do you know?
I don't remember.
All right.
I don't remember specifically, no. Probably, but I can't say for sure.
All right. Well, looking at the wording that we've just been through, do you think, in fact, that this document might be the source of some of the wording we have been discussing about the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire from page 1, and about the product meeting the criteria in BR 135? Could this be the source of the wording we end up seeing in issue 1 of the BBA certificate?
It's possible, but we would not at that time. We would not normally have just taken that wording directly without checking it and seeing if it was right.
What do you mean you would not normally have done that? Are there circumstances in which you would have simply lifted assertions from within a manufacturer's marketing material and placed them into the technical sections of a BBA certificate?
I think what I mean by that is that, in a way, a BBA certificate was a way perhaps of taking manufacturers. I think that was one use of or application of BBA certificate was looking at manufacturers' claims and then assessing whether those could be included in the certificate or not. But generally, I don't think we didn't take the wording directly from the manufacturer's literature.
Yes, I understand that, and that's the answer you had given me just now. My question is this: when you say you wouldn't generally do that, or you wouldn't normally do that, which is what you've just told us, are you saying that there are circumstances in which the BBA would have simply lifted claims from within the manufacturer's marketing material and placed those as assertions into a BBA certificate without carrying out any checks?
Oh, okay. No, that wouldn't be normal.
I know that it wouldn't be normal. I'm asking it if it ever occurred.
Oh, okay. Not that I can recall. No.
All right. Do you think it is one possibility that what George Lee did in the case of issue 1 of K15 is just that? Take the manufacturer's assertions and put them into a BBA certificate?
It's possible. I couldn't say whether that's what he did in this case.
Well, why couldn't you say that, given that you were responsible for the technical sign-off of the content of the certificate?
Only that I don't recall that being the case.
I see. All right. Let's go, please, to Mr. Moore's witness statement. This is the second witness statement of Brian Moore, which is BBA 30111097. And this is going to bring us back to discuss a couple of the answers you gave a few minutes ago. So BBA 30111097, please. And if we can go to page 4. Yes, if we look at paragraph 3M, we can see that Mr. Moore has been asked about the initial technical assessment by the BBA of K15 in 2008. And in particular, he has been asked about the assertion that K15 had achieved a classification to class 0. He says, starting at paragraph 15, certificate 084582 and the first issue of certificate 145134 stated that the product was a class 0 low-risk material. In order to demonstrate this, test reports are required to BS 476 Part 6 and BS 476 Part 7, and no such reports are contained on any of the K15 file folders. He then goes on at paragraph 16. Instead, the classification for K15 was extrapolated from a series of fire reports on similar Kingspan phenolic products, including those of similar density and facing type. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Moore was asked about this in his evidence a couple of days ago, and for the record, this was at the transcript day 107, page 167, lines 7 to 15. I won't take you to it, Mr. Hunt, unless we need to. He made clear that he arrived at the conclusion that an extrapolation of the type he has described here had been carried out, later and on the basis of a deduction, that it was more likely than not that that is what would have been done. So I'm obviously paraphrasing, but he essentially said, because there's no test data establishing class 0 for K15 on the file, he and Mr. Albon, in discussion together, deduced that it was more likely than not that an extrapolation had been carried out from similar products. All right?
Yes.
If we go, please, to your witness statement now, which is BBA 30111087, and to page 11. Thank you. We can see here, without reading through all of them, that you have been asked, if we look at paragraph G, is it correct that the product was stated in the certificate to have achieved class 0 on the basis of an extrapolation? Your answer is at 47, I don't know. On what basis did you or anyone else consider that appropriate? Your answer at 48, I don't know. Scrolling down, please. On what basis did you consider that the BBA was entitled to describe as class 0 a product which had not, to the BBA's knowledge, achieved that classification? I don't know. And then you're asked at J, please explain with reference to the documents how the extrapolation was carried out. Essentially, that's what you're being asked there. Who carried out this exercise? On what basis? Please also explain who was responsible for authorizing this decision. And your answer at 50, again, I don't know. So to be clear, the evidence you gave to us a few minutes ago that you imagined that it might have been that test data from similar products was looked at and somehow, possibly Mr. Lee carried out some sort of assessment exercise from different test data on different products to arrive at a conclusion that K15 has class 0. Is that something you actually remember from the time, or has that come to you since the inquiry has been asking about these matters?
I think if I could, I don't know if this is helpful, but a bit of explanation perhaps of preparing the witness statement. I received notification to do with the witness statement fairly late on, and with just before Christmas, with a fairly tight time scale on. So I did most of this from memory, and then had a chance just to have a quick look at the BBA files. But I think can't remember if this was exactly your question, but I think because I've obviously heard and seen the other evidence that's as it's been going through the inquiry. So
yes,
I think it's. I'm ever so sorry. I can't remember what your actual question was.
That's quite all right. It was a very long question. My question is this: let's put it differently. Can you remember? Do you have any recollection of any technical assessment or extrapolation being carried out at the time to arrive at a conclusion that K15 was classified to class 0?
Oh, okay. So I don't have a clear recollection of that from memory.
Do you have any recollection of that?
I think it seems very likely to me that was the case. Now, and the evidence that I've seen and has been building up, I think does tend to indicate that. Do I have a clear memory of it? No, I don't. All
right. So you say you don't have a clear memory of it. I'm sorry, but so that I'm clear, do you have any memory of that taking place?
I think seeing this relationship or possible relationship between some of the other call firm boards, which has appeared, in some of the documents, it seems highly likely. So
I understand that your evidence.
I don't have a clear memory of it. No.
No, I understand that. Let's break this down. I'm so sorry, but it is quite important.
Okay.
I understand that you're saying that you think it's likely that that is what occurred. I'll come to that. I also understand that you're saying you don't have a clear recollection of that actually occurring. My question now is, when you say you don't have a clear memory of it occurring, do you have any memory at all of that type of extrapolation being carried out?
Oh, okay. I think more recently, yes, I think I do have a vague memory, if you like, of that happening.
I see.
I just
What
can't
is
remember
that
the details of it, but I, some of the evidence is, if you like, has triggered a vague memory that was how it was done.
I see.
And so yes.
Forgive me, go ahead.
I said, so yes, a sort of a vague memory, but no detailed recollection.
Fine. What is the vague memory?
The thing I'm trying. It's difficult to, in a way, to disentangle what my mind is perhaps filling in from what has been heard more recently.
Indeed.
From what actually would have been the case at the time, and there may be no definitive way of doing that, perhaps, but
let's
I think given the relationship between, or possible relationship, I guess this is one of the issues, between Cooltherm K8 and some of the other Cooltherm boards, that yes, that would have been what was done.
Right. Forgive me.
Sorry.
I need to address that. What do you mean, given the relationship between Cooltherm K8 and some of the other Cooltherm boards? What do you actually know about that? What is the relation, Mr. Hunt, between Cooltherm K8 and Cooltherm K15?
That I don't recall in detail. They were part of this, obviously the same Cooltherm family of phenolic boards.
Right.
Exactly how they related, I can't remember in detail.
All right. Can you remember seeing any documents at the time relating to any extrapolation exercise?
I can't, no.
All right. I want to ask you about something Brian Moore told us in his evidence, talking about what he came to understand from Mr. Albon. And that's at the transcript at day 107, page 170, lines 17 to 23. Actually, let's go to that, please. So transcript day 107, page 170, lines 17 to 23. Yes, Mr. Moore was being asked there about this extrapolation we've been discussing from one set of Cooltherm products to another. And if we look, please, at his answer at line 17, he said this: I understood that it wasn't common, but it was not unusual. If there were products of a similar kind to each other, and if the performance was adjudged to be so similar to one that we'd already assessed, it was not unusual for the BBA to extrapolate its opinion from one product to a similar one. That was the core of the conversation. So, just in very basic terms, do you agree with that? Is that something the BBA did or was not unusual for the BBA to do in 2008, to your knowledge?
Can I just check where it says that was the core of the conversation, that was conversation with John Albon?
That's correct.
Sorry, can you just repeat the actual question again?
Yes, the question was whether you agree with Mr. Moore, or with what he appears to have been discussing with Mr. Albon. Mr. Moore tells us in that section that I've just read to you that he was given to understand that it was not common, but was not unusual for this practice to take place, that the BBA would extrapolate a class 0 test result from one product to another. And what I'm asking is, do you think that is right? That it wasn't necessarily common practice, but it was not unusual?
Yes, I think I would agree with that.
I see. Can you ever remember yourself carrying out any such extrapolation exercise?
I don't recall any specific incidences, but I think, I mean, it's quite likely that it did happen at that time and before that time, but I couldn't name you a particular product.
No, you don't need to do that. Do you remember ever overseeing an extrapolation of that type carried out by someone else, one of your project managers? Can you actually remember ever doing that?
I remember, I think I do, I do remember cases where, not necessarily on an insulation product, I'm trying to think now, but on products where surface spread of flame, the class 1 or class 0 might have been relevant, where that was done. Yeah, certainly I don't think it was unusual
I see.
to do that.
Do you know at the time whether any external qualified fire engineer was ever asked by the BBA whether it was appropriate to extrapolate in this manner from one product to another? Are you aware of advice having been sought on that matter or that practice?
I think it did. Yes, I think, again, if my memory from the time on products was that if that was going to be done, if that was something which was being considered, that it would generally the project manager or the section head or the approvals manager, as they became, would have discussed it with Brian Haynes generally in the first instance, seen what his opinion was, and then sought an external opinion if it was considered necessary.
I see. Are you aware, Mr. Hunt, that during the period you were head of approvals and signing off issue 1 of that certificate for K15, that in fact Kingspan continually struggled to achieve class 0 for that product?
I don't recall that, no.
No. Are you aware now that during the life of that BBA certificate, which you approved, Kingspan had obtained test results which showed that they were not able to achieve class 0 for that product?
No, I don't recall that.
No. Do you agree that had the BBA actually insisted on seeing some test data relevant to K15 and class 0, the BBA would have discovered that fact?
Potentially, yes.
What do you mean potentially? If you had seen test data which showed that the product could not achieve class 0, you would have discovered that it could not be classified to class 0, would you not?
Yes, if we'd seen the data, yes.
Why did you, as head of approvals, allow a technical assertion of that kind to be printed in a certificate without checking whether or not it was correct?
I think at the time I must have considered that what we had was close enough to other products.
On what basis?
I think that just on based on the extrapolation that seems likely to have occurred, but other than that, I can't account for it.
No. Do you agree, thinking about it now, that the BBA should have requested test data to parts 6 and 7 of BS 476 for the product it was certifying, K15?
Yes, given what I know now, yes.
Yes. It's a very basic failure of due diligence on the part of the BBA. Do you accept that?
Given the facts that we know now, yes. Would I consider that at the time? Obviously not.
Give me, Mr. Hunt, but that's the point, isn't it? When you say given the facts that we know now, you would have known them at the time had someone asked. Do you see?
sorry, had
would have
someone
known
asked?
at the time that there were problems achieving class 0 for K15 had those test results actually been sought from Kingspan?
Oh, okay. Yes, I think is there no evidence that they were sought?
Well, I'm not sure we need to go through Kingspan's struggles with 476 testing at this stage.
Oh, okay.
On this topic, my last question for you is this: do you accept now that this was in fact a very basic failure of due diligence on your part as head of approvals?
Yes.
All right, let's go on to a different topic, please. And I want to talk with you about the initial assessment of K15 as a product to be newly certified. So if we go to your witness statement, please, BBA 30111087, and back to page 11. Right, if we go can we go to the very bottom of this page, please? Here you've been asked, on the basis of information given to this inquiry by the BBA, the following question. The inquiry also understands from the BBA's letter of the 18th of April 2019 that no initial assessment of the manufacture of the product took place. And going over to page 12, please, and that this appears to have been on the basis that Kingspan's quality standards were, in the view of the BBA, well established. You are then asked in your witness statement whether that is correct in your view, and your answer at paragraph 51 is, I note that there was no initial factory inspection, but this in isolation would not have concerned me. Now, just so that I am clear, is that something you noted at the time before you reviewed the certificate for approval, or are you noting it now?
Oh, okay, so I was noting it now, having obviously seen the file for doing the evidence, but I think I also would have been aware of it at the time, because I think I would have known that the factory was under surveillance already.
I see. Can we go on to page 12 of your witness statement, please, and to inquiry question C there? Yes, there you're asked about this decision not to carry out any initial assessment of the manufacture of the product. Is this normal practice? If not, why not? And you say at paragraph 53, I believe so. At the time, the manufacturer was already subject to BBA surveillance for related products. You then confirm actually at paragraph 54 that you were personally aware that no initial assessment of the product had taken place. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we go on down the page, please. You're asked whether you consider that to represent good practice. And you say, yes, this is paragraph 55. If satisfactory surveillance was considered to be established for similar products at that location. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
I think my basic question is this: how could anyone have known that K15 would be manufactured in an identical way to the products under surveillance if nobody had been out to assess that?
I mean, this was fairly normal practice at the time.
I understand that. And my question is, how could it be established, given that you're saying not only that it was normal practice, but that you consider it to represent good practice? My question is, how could anyone have established, other than taking the manufacturer's word for it, that the product which was about to be newly certificated was manufactured in the same way as and subject to the same standards as other products if no one had checked that?
Usually where a new product was being added to a range that was being produced in the same factory, the new product would get added to the think at the time BBA called them quality plans.
Yes.
And it would fall under the surveillance for that factory site, and would be assessed by the auditor as part of that, and would want to see the records of that, and the production controls that were carried out.
Yes. Right. I want to take you back to a different section, please, of the certificate. So if we can go back to BBA 6038. We're going to continue on, Mr. Hunt, in section 7. And if we look, please, at section 7.3, do you see that?
Yes.
In buildings with a floor more than 18 meters above ground level, advice should be sought from the certificate holder. That's the manufacturer, Kingspan, yes?
Yes.
Do you remember seeing that when you approved this certificate?
Yes, I believe so.
Why does the certificate refer or direct readers back to the manufacturer in this way?
From memory, that was not an unusual statement in a BBA certificate.
Fine. Whether or not it was unusual, why was it done?
Okay, I think, trying to remember my, the what would have been the thinking at the time, but I think it would have been because the buildings over 8 or higher buildings over 18 meters particularly would the design of the system, the design of the cladding, the interaction between the cladding system and insulation and the building itself, the building elements, became more complex. The considerations were more complex, and therefore there may be Kingspan, in this case the certificate holder may have been able to provide some guidance on the use of the product or the type of system it would work with in that situation.
I see. Did you understand at the time of approving this certificate that the use of K15 on buildings over 18 meters was in fact limited to the one specific configuration that had been tested to BS 8414 Part 1, which is set out in section 7.1 of the certificate? Did that form part of your understanding?
I can't remember precisely at the time. I would have thought so, or at least that it could have been that the design team on a particular project would have been able to have an assessment of those results done in terms of whether whether that test data was could be assessed and used on a particular build-up, particular system.
Mr. Hunt, the BBA was, in October 2008, an independent certification organisation, yes?
Yes.
Did you consider, at the time of approving this certificate, that the organisation best placed to make clear to readers and construction professionals what the limitations of use for K15 over 18 meters was the manufacturer rather than an independent certification body?
I'm not sure how to answer that really. It was not, as I say, that this was the sort of statement which would appear in a number of BBA certificates.
Yes, I see, but you're not sure why, is that right?
Well, I think because perhaps this is, I don't know, perhaps this is taking a step back, but because this is a certificate for a product, a component, insulation board is a component in this case, that you can never really know all the circumstances of the finished project. A certificate is for a product. It wasn't in this case for a system, and even a certificate for a system needs the context of use on that particular project establishing, because I think at the end of the day, the building regs requirements relate to the building, not any one component. You could only go so far in giving data on a product. It's not sufficient in its own.
Yes, I understand that. What I was really trying to get at was why, as an independent certification organisation, the BBA did not make clear in this certificate that K15 could only be used over 18 metres in one specific configuration. That assertion or that statement is not anywhere in this certificate, is it?
No, I don't think it is, no.
And instead, the BBA's readers are directed back to the manufacturer of the product for advice on that subject, yes?
Yes.
Right. Let's go on to something else now, please. We know obviously that this certificate, issue 1, bears the date 27th of October 2008. And I want you please to look at an email now. If we can go to that, it's KIN 402093. Yes, if you can look, please. I need to take you to page 2 first, I think. Yes. Do you see an email there from George Lee, dated the 24th of December 2008?
Yes.
And that is sent to Gareth Mills at Kingspan, and you are copied in. Do you see that?
Yes.
Mr. Lee says there, "Hi Gareth, we've recently received a number of comments on the K15 certificate in relation to the clarity of wording used as part of this certificate's fire section. In response to this, we have a suggested amendment to the text which we wish to make. This amendment we will make at no cost to yourselves and as an improvement to the certificate, which I hope you will agree will improve how this certificate will read in the future." Do you see that?
Yes.
George Lee in late 2008 was still reporting to you, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so, yes, yes.
Yes. What comments had the BBA received between the publication of issue 1 on the 27th of October 2008 and this email on Christmas Eve 2008?
I don't recall. We must have received some comments.
Yeah. But you can't recall what those were?
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
No. Having approved the certificate, would you have expected as head of approvals to have been made aware of what those comments were?
Yes, generally, yes.
All right. And he's copied you into this email, Mr. Lee. Do you think that, well, would you expect him to have sent this email to Gareth Mills in which he proposes a number of amendments to improve the clarity of the wording on the fire section? Was there some discussion with you before he did that? Can you remember?
Yeah, probably yes. I can't recall exactly what it was.
All right. Do you remember being at all concerned at the time that only 2 months after publication, in the BBA's view at least, amendments were required to the fire section?
Yes, possibly. Amendments were, certificates were amended from time to time.
Yes.
After issue because something had been, a reader had seen something, or either internally or externally something had been
yes, I understand.
raised, and then we would, as it here, it would, if it was a sort of a correction or an amendment, we then would try and do that without, and not charge the certificate holder for it.
Yes, all right. Let's look at what Mr. Lee was proposing. if we look at the third paragraph of his email, please, which should still be on your screen. Forgive me. He says this: the changes I propose are as follows. At the first bullet point, product scope and summary of certificate, remove the word external. And then at the second bullet point, key factors assessed. Now that is the section we've spent some time looking at from page 1 of the certificate. Do you remember?
Yes.
And his proposal is key factors assessed, behaviour in relation to fire. The boards are classified as class 0. The boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. The product has been tested to BS 84141 for a specific construction on masonry walls. So we can look at it again if that would make it easier, but do you see that the change proposed to that section of the key factors assessed is the final sentence there? The product has been tested to BS 84141 for a specific construction on masonry walls. That is the proposed addition. Do you see?
Yes, yes. Which ties in with the what we were just talking about. Yeah.
It does, doesn't it? Because that is the specific assertion that was missing from the 27th of October 2008 issue of the certificate for K15. Do you see?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
All right. And it's a fundamentally important piece of information. Would you agree?
Yes. It clearly has been. It has been raised by. It's been raised.
Yes. Do you agree that it's? Sorry, I overspoke.
Sorry. No, I think yes. It was something which you know should have been in the certificate. Yeah.
Yes, and presumably that's why the amendment's being proposed. If that had been set out on the front page of the certificate under key factors assessed, do you agree that that wording would make absolutely clear to a reader that the use of the product at height was limited to one specific configuration on masonry walls?
Yes, that does clarify that point. Yes.
Yes. All right. Let's go up to the bottom of page 1 of this email chain, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Drew, but yes. Mr. Hunt, in the light of your earlier evidence, would you also agree that a statement that the product has been tested in accordance with BS 8414 is itself erroneous?
Yes, I think so. The product was tested as part of a system.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Sorry. On you go, Ms. Drew.
No. In fact, I wonder, given the progress that I'm making this morning, whether looking at the time, this might be a good time for us to take a short break.
Well, tell me how you're getting on.
I'm afraid my progress has been suboptimal, and I think it is unlikely, if we continue now, that I will be finished by 11:30.
Well, 11:30 might not be an absolute deadline. I know it's always extremely difficult to know quite how much time is going to be required, but do you think you're going to be another 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes?
I think 30 is a very safe estimate, and I would hope to be done within 30 minutes, but I think 15 is too short.
Well, I'm quite anxious to avoid too many breaks in the day. I'm sorry to cross you, Mr. Hunt, but we will have a break this morning. But if we could combine it with the usual break that we have for considering further questions, that would obviously be convenient to everyone. Would you be happy, Mr. Hunt, to go on for another between 15 and 30 minutes, or do you need a break now?
No, that is fine for me, sir.
All right. Well, that's good of you. Thank you. Well, Ms. Trooper, I think that we'll carry on.
Yes.
But I think that we need to have a break somewhere around 20 to 12.
I understand.
If you can manage it. I'm not trying to put you under pressure. I'm just trying to give you an indication of how far I think we can afford to go.
I understand. I'll do my best, and if we come...
Just take your course, but if
yes.
If at 20 to 12 you haven't finished, I think we might have to have a break.
I understand. Thank you. Right, Mr. Hunt, let's go back, please, to the email we were looking at between Mr. Lee and Kingspan from December 2008. If we can go, yes, there it is. There is Kingspan's response, and that appears to come on the 5th of March 2009. So a good number of months after Mr. Lee's email to Kingspan on this matter. Do you see?
Yes, I can't remember the date of George Lee's email.
It's the 24th of December 2008. And here is Philip Heath's response on the 5th of March 2009.
Okay, yes.
Do you remember being aware of that delay in a response from Kingspan at the time?
I don't remember specifically what the delay was.
No, do you remember being aware of the delay?
I possibly, yes. I don't recall it in detail, but seeing that email, then clearly, yes.
Yes, all right, let's look at the response. Good afternoon, George. Gareth Mills has brought to my attention your recent emails in relation to our BBA certificate for K15. Firstly, may we register our concern at the proposal to reissue this certificate so soon after publication, when we have waited some considerable time for its issue. And going over the page, please. Secondly, your request is receiving our attention. However, we are determining the implications to Kingspan of this speedy reissue, as documentation has been published that refers to the current certificate and the wording therein. Therefore, there could be cost implications to Kingspan that we would have no option but to pass on the BBA if we are in agreement to your request. Once we've completed our audit to determine the implications for Kingspan insulation, we will be back to you. Now, I see that response from Philip Heath to George Lee does not appear to have copied you in. Do you remember seeing it at the time?
I don't remember seeing that response in detail. I think I do remember Kingspan being a bit resistant to the amendment.
Did you consider why that might be?
Probably only in terms, I don't remember this in detail, but only probably in the terms that are in Mr. Heath's response, that you know, this business of the literature and the cost of that. That may well have been what I understood to be their resistance at that time.
Yes, all right. Given the BBA's obvious awareness that there was some lack of clarity in the fire section, and given that comments had obviously been received by the BBA to that effect, why was this not followed up? Why has it been allowed to run on until March 2009?
I can't recall for sure. It should have been followed up before then.
All right. And what about thereafter, having received that email from Mr. Heath informing the BBA that Kingspan were carrying out an audit to determine the implications for Kingspan? Do you remember what activity took place thereafter? When did a response come in from Kingspan?
What, following that email?
Following that email.
Yes, I don't recall.
No. All right. Can we go, please, to the third witness statement of John Albon, which is BBA 30-10751, and to page 30, please. Yes, if we look, please, at paragraph 111, Mr. Albon is talking here, Mr. Hunt, about amended issue 1, the certificate we looked at yesterday, which bears a date of the 6th of April 2010. Do you remember?
Yes.
And he says there, although the date of the amendment is given on the certificate as the 6th of April 2010, In fact, it was not published until the 12th of July 2013 and was superseded by the second issue dated the 17th of December 2013. My simple question is this: is that right as far as you can remember? Is it correct that amended issue 1 was not published until July 2013?
I can't remember. I can't remember. If the records at the BBA show that, then that seems the what would have happened. But I don't remember that.
Right. All right. Let's go back. Let's go now, please, to amended issue 1 of the certificate. So that's BBA 3037. And if we can go, I want to ask you straight away, please, about section 7. So if we go to page 5. Yes. And if we look at section 7, behaviour in relation to fire, it's a bit difficult to spot, but we can see that there's been a change to section 7.1. If we look at that together, it tells us in the first 2 lines that the product is classified as class 0 or low risk, as it did before, yes?
Yes.
And then where we see the words in bold England and Wales, just as before, we see approved document B, paragraph 8.4, volume 1, and paragraphs 12.5 and 12.6. And then we see and 12.7, volume 2. So we can put them up side by side if we need to. But what has changed between issue 1 and amended issue 1 is that in this issue, amended issue 1, the words and 12.7 have been added. Do you see?
Yes.
So this certificate now tells us that the product, K15, may be used in accordance with the provisions of 12.7 of approved document B, amongst other provisions. Do you see?
Yes, I do.
What was the reason for that addition?
I don't have a clear recollection from the time. I think it may have been related to masonry cavity walls.
What do you mean it may have been related to masonry cavity walls?
Well, having thought about it more recently, again, obviously with the looking at the certificates and the available files, and I think that reference was probably related to masonry cavity construction, because
yes,
that reference appears in approved document B. There is that reference to masonry cavity walls, and masonry external walls are mentioned in the certificate.
Yes, that is something that you have considered fairly recently may have been the reason for the inclusion of that wording. Is that right?
Yes, but it seems to me now that was also the likely situation at the time.
I see. Were you familiar with the content of approved document B 12.7 at the time?
I believe so. Certainly with the fact that clause appears in approved document B at the time and related to this situation. Yeah. All
right. Well, let's take a look at it. Can we go to CLG 1 and then 607, please, Mr. Hunt? This is the 2006 edition of approved document B.
Okay.
And if we can go, please, to page 94. Yes, I'm so sorry. So if we can go on down 2 more pages. Yes, there we can see 12.7 under the heading Insulation Materials Products. And it reads, in a building with a story 18 meters or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. see Appendix A. This restriction does not apply to masonry cavity wall construction, which complies with diagram 34 in section 9. Yes?
Yes.
So having looked at that section, can you assist me any further with how K15 could be used in accordance with the provisions of that section?
I think it in a situation where it was insulation within a masonry cavity wall construction.
I see. Do you agree that insulation within a masonry cavity wall construction, I'm so sorry, is the exception in 12.7? In other words, such materials should be of limited combustibility other than where they're being used in masonry cavity wall construction.
Yes, I believe so. Although there's also the provision further up that if the system's been tested and meets the criteria of BR 135, then that is the other exception, I think, isn't it?
I see. Let's just try and stick with this. I want to make sure that I understand your evidence.
Oh, okay.
Are you saying that you think now, having looked at it, that probably that wording and 12.7 was included because the BBA intended to indicate that within the exception in 12.7, K15 could be used? Is that your reasoning?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
I see. Why does the certificate not simply say that?
That I don't know.
Do you think it would have been helpful for it to do so if that was truly the intention of that wording?
Yes, I think it would.
Have you spoken at any stage to John Albon about what the reasoning for the inclusion of 12.7 is in amended issue 1?
No, I don't think so, no.
All right. Let's go back, please, to amended issue 1 and to page 5. So I'm sorry, the reference is BBA 6037.
Well, before we do that, Ms. Troop, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but just help me with this, if you would, Mr. Hunt. Would it not be fair to say that the thrust of paragraph 12.7 is to tell the reader that in relation to certain sorts of buildings, those above 18 meters, the insulation should be of limited combustibility? Is that right?
Yes, yes. Although there is obviously that.
There is an exception, but the primary thrust of the paragraph is to tell you that. Now, if the certificate includes a statement that a material may be used in accordance with paragraph 12.7, does that not risk at least giving the impression that it can be used in buildings over 18 meters because it is of limited combustibility?
There is the risk that it could be read that way. Yes. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, on you go, Ms. Troop.
Thank you. That risk you've just referred to, Mr. Hunt, could have been entirely stamped out by the inclusion of wording indicating that it was a reference only to the exception in 12.7, couldn't it?
Yes, it could.
Yeah. Do you accept that this is potentially quite dangerously misleading, this inclusion of the idea that K15 can be used in accordance with the provisions at 12.7?
Yes, I think it should have been clarified.
Yes. All right. Let's go back, please, to amended issue 1, BBA 6037, and to page 5. If we look towards the bottom of that page at section 7.5, we can see that the description of the BS 8414 test has moved to that section. Do you see that? At the very bottom of the page, there are 6 lines there detailing the system that was tested.
Yes.
And if we go over the page, please, to page 6, we can see that the wording we were discussing earlier at the very end of that paragraph, which stated that the product meets the criteria within BR 135, has been removed. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Why was that?
I don't recall. I don't recall from the time. I'm not sure why it was removed.
Had there been, as far as you can remember, any comments or complaints about the accuracy of that previous assertion that the product met the criteria in BR 135?
It's possible. I don't remember it. But it is possible. Whether it was a internal or external, I can't remember.
I see. All right. Were you made aware, Mr. Hunt, as far as you can remember, of any complaints or concerns about any aspect of any certificate for K15?
In the entire, over the course of the various issues of.
Over the course of all the various issues.
Okay. I became aware that there was and I think it came up in the witness statement. There was an email from DCLG.
Fine, let's go to that. Yes, should we take a look at that? It's BBA 50178, please. We can go down, please, to page 3, in fact. And there we see an email from Brian Martin of DCLG to John Albon, copying in Guy Bampton and Nick Price on the 11th of July, 2014. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Let's look at it together. Mr. Martin writes as follows: Dear John, I'm not sure we have met. I am currently the official at DCLG responsible for Part B of the building regulations. It has come to my attention that BBA certificate 08452/2008 included advice that the product in question satisfied paragraph 12.7 of volume 2 of approved document B. Para 12 provides that insulation materials used in external walls should be materials of limited combustibility. It would appear, however, that the product in question is not a material of limited combustibility. I am also aware that certificate 08452 has recently been revised and that this reference has been removed. I am concerned that the original certificate may have been issued in error. As this is a serious safety matter, I would appreciate it if you could investigate and advise me of the outcome of your investigation as soon as possible. Could you please also acknowledge receipt of this email? All right.
Yes.
Have you seen that email previously?
Yes, I think I've seen the chain of emails.
When?
It was, I think it was shown me at the time when John Albon was when he replied to it.
So, do you remember, do you mean in person, you and he had a discussion, or are you talking about emails?
Oh, I think in person. I think he told me that that he'd had it and that he'd replied to it, and I think he showed me the reply. I don't think he emailed it to me. I think it was just a hard copy.
I see. So just so that I'm clear, the first that you became aware of this intervention from DCLG was through a face-to-face discussion with John Albon, by which time he had already replied to Brian Martin. Is that correct?
I think so, yes. I can't be absolutely sure of the precise sequence, but it was at this time of the reply. Whether he showed it to me before he sent it or after, I can't remember.
I see. But did he ask you in a more investigative manner what happened here? Why is 12.7 included in this certificate?
I don't recall that in in the way you've described. I don't remember it in an investigative capacity. No.
That might have been an unhelpful word on my part. Let me put it differently. As far as you can recollect, did Mr. Albon come and ask you questions about the inclusion of reference to 12.7 in amended issue 1?
I don't remember that specifically, no.
Did anyone else come and ask you questions about why that reference had been included in amended issue 1?
Not that I can recall.
Let's look at Mr. Albon's response, please. If we go up to page 2, we can see, yes, so it's the email there on the 16th of July at 12:14. Do you see it?
Yes, I do.
And we see that his response says this: thank you for your mail regarding the above certificate. And if we look actually, please, at the third paragraph starting the reference, do you see that?
Yes, I do.
The reference to paragraph 12.7 seems to have been an unfortunate and rare oversight that would not escape the internal checks and measures that BBA currently operate. A review of other certificates has confirmed that this has not been reproduced elsewhere. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree with what Brian Martin is being told there, that this inclusion of 12.7 was an unfortunate and rare oversight?
I think so. In general, yes. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't go into detail there, but I think it was either, you know, the reference was entirely, you know, shouldn't have been there, or it should have been qualified.
Yes, but did Mr. Albon not ask you any questions about that?
He may have done. I don't remember him doing so, no.
I see. All right. Did you see this response that John Albon sent to Brian Martin?
I have seen it, and I think I was shown it at the time.
All right.
I can't remember if I saw this email separate from the complete string.
Fine. Let's go up a little further, please, to if we scroll up, please, but still on page 2, we can say that the next day there's a follow-up email from Mr. Martin on the 17th of July who says, John, many thanks for your prompt response. For completeness, I wonder if you could confirm a couple of things for me. What has BBA put in place since the original certificate was issued to make you so confident this won't happen again? A summary would be fine. And just holding that in your mind, please, we could go up the page again to look at John Albon's response to that question. Yes, that comes on the 23rd of July. And he says there, Brian, the mistake was basically caused by human error. The project manager involved and their line manager no longer work in the BBA's operations department. And he then goes on to set out a number of other measures which he says have been taken. We don't need to go to it, Mr. Hunt, but Mr. Albon has been asked by this inquiry in his witness statements who the two individuals he's referring to in his opening paragraphs there are, and he names those individuals as you and Mr. Lee. All right?
Yes.
What I'd quite like to understand from you is whether there was anything other than, I realize it's difficult for you to recall, but I have the impression that you had some sort of discussion with John Albon where he simply said, we've had an email from Brian Martin, here it is, and here's how I've responded. Did anyone ever say to you, hang on a moment, Mr. Hunt, you were the head of approvals at the time. How did this happen? How did this potentially extremely misleading statement make its way into a certificate?
I don't recall a conversation in those terms, no.
No. And was the first you ever heard of any issue with that certificate, amended issue 1, at this time in July 2014?
I can't think of any others. I'd obviously, from having changed roles in 2010, I only, you know, after that point, my involvement obviously had stopped with that certificate until.
Yes, I understand that.
And this, you know, this email was the, so this is the only one I can recall.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Hunt, I've come to the end of my prepared questions for you, just slightly over time, but I'll hand back to the chairman now because we need to take another short pause at this stage.
Right. Well, thank you, Ms. Troop. Well, Mr. Hunt, I did say we'd have a break during the morning, and we are going to get one and take it now. So we'll come back at 12 o'clock, please, noon. At that stage, we will know whether there are any further sweep-up questions that Ms. Troop wants to ask, and whether any other questions have been suggested for you by other people. So, so we'll know then whether there's more to put to you. In the meantime, please, I must ask you again, as I have before, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it over the break. All right?
Okay. Yes,
Thank you very much, and we'll see you at 12 o'clock.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Welcome back, everybody. We're now going to go back to Mr. Hunt to see whether there are any further questions. But first, I better check that Mr. Hunt is there. Can you see me and hear me, Mr. Hunt?
Yes, I can, sir.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, we'll now find out from Miss Troop whether she has any more questions for you. Miss Troop.
There are not. We have no further questions for you, Mr. Hunt.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Hunt, I'm sorry we've kept you waiting to tell you that, but perhaps you're relieved in any event. Anyway, there it is. We've put to you all the questions we needed to put to you. We are very grateful to you for making yourself available to give evidence to us. It's been very helpful to hear what you have to tell us. And now you're free to go. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Now, we've got another witness waiting to be called, but we need to have a short break just to make the necessary arrangements for that. So we'll stop now for a few minutes and return, I hope, in about 10 minutes or even less if we can manage it. Welcome back, everyone. Our next witness is Mr. John Albon of the British Board of Agrément. So my first task is to check that Mr. Albon can see me and hear me clearly. Are you there, Mr. Albon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can hear you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I understand you are going to make the affirmation, is that right?
Yes, please.
And I think you should have the words on the screen in front of you.
Yes.
Right, well then, could I ask you to make the affirmation by reading out the words? Thank you.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good, thank you very much. Now, there are one or two things we just need to clarify before we get to your evidence. Can you confirm that you're alone in the room from which you're giving your evidence?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you have no documents or other materials with you?
I don't.
Right. And finally, can I ask you to confirm that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you which is capable of receiving messages?
No, I have no electronic devices.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. I hope that we shan't have problems with sound or vision. We haven't had very many, but if we do have one, we'll probably take a short break while the technical support team solve it for us. There will be a short break partway through the afternoon, probably about 3:15. And since I think we're going to go over the weekend during the course of the mornings next week. But if you need any additional breaks, will you indicate and we'll do our best to accommodate you. All right.
Thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to ask me or raise before you begin giving evidence?
No, thank you.
Right, thank you. Well, in that case, I'm going to invite Ms. Grange to put some questions to you. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Albon, or actually good afternoon now. Thank you very much for attending this public inquiry to give your evidence. It is very much appreciated. If you have any difficulties in understanding any of my questions, please just ask me to repeat the question or put the point in a different way. Can you also keep your voice up for the transcriber who's taking a live transcription of your evidence? And can you try and avoid nodding or shaking your head so that we do have clear answers for the transcript? Now, you've made 3 statements to the inquiry. If we can bring up the first of your statements, that's at BBA 50158. There we can see your first statement. It's dated the 13th of November 2018. It's 17 pages long. And if we go, and it also has a 2-page appendix. And if we go to page 17, is that your signature at the bottom there?
Yes, it is.
Yes, thank you. And your second statement is to be found at BBA 30010723. There's your second statement. We can see it's dated the 20th of June 2019. And if we go to page 40, again, is that your signature there?
Yes, it is.
And if we bring up your third statement now, that's to be found at BBA 30010751. This is dated the 5th of September 2019, and it's 53 pages long. So if we go to page 53, again, is that your signature there at the bottom?
Yes.
Now, have you read those 3 statements recently?
Yes.
And can you confirm that the contents of them are true and accurate?
Yes, they are.
Have you discussed those statements or your evidence that you're going to give with anybody before coming here today?
Only with the BBA's lawyer.
Okay, thank you. Now, in your statements, you address 2 products which were used as part of the cladding system at Grenfell Tower. First, the Rainabon 55 ACM panels, and second, the Kingspan K15 phenolic insulation. Now, in terms of how my questions will be ordered, I'm going to start by asking you some general questions about the BBA and its practices and procedures. And then I'm going to ask you first about the BBA's involvement with the Rainabond ACM panels and the certification of that, before turning to consider its involvement with the K15, the Kingspan phenolic product, in the latter part of my questioning. So that's how it's going to be structured. Now, just beginning then with some general questions about the BBA as an organisation, if we can bring up paragraph 12 of your first statement on page 3, that's BBA 50158, page 3. And you tell us there in the first few lines of paragraph 12 that the Agrément board was established by the government in 1966 following building failures that were attributed to the inappropriate use of innovative construction materials, yes?
Yes.
And you go on to explain that the intention was to provide an independent, authoritative source of data on the performance of such products and their suitability for use in clearly defined applications. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you go on to explain in the 5th line that the original status of the organisation was a semi-autonomous, non-departmental body. But just to be clear, it was originally funded by government, yes?
As I understand it, there was some government funding. I'm not sure if it was entirely government funded. It was before my time.
I see. Yes, thank you. And what you go on to explain at the very bottom of that page in that paragraph is that over time its links to government have eroded and that you now operate as a self-funding non-profit distributing company limited by guarantee with no formal government associations. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you tell us in the next paragraph, paragraph 13 on page 4, that in 1982, the organisation, sorry, it's in the same paragraph, that in 1982, the organisation became known as the British Board of Agrément, and that coincided with that change of status. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Now, just in terms of your background and your education, you summarise this in your second witness statement, but I'm just going to go through the key points. It's right, isn't it, that you have an honours degree in chemistry from the University of Bath?
Yes.
And prior to joining the BBA, you worked as a development chemist for Johnson Matthey Chemicals, is that right?
Yes.
And you also worked as a technical service representative for Albright and Wilson Limited, is that right?
Yes.
And did you work as a chemist in that role for Albright and Wilson?
It was a customer services representative. It was a field-based position.
Right, yeah. And you joined the BBA in 1989, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you confirm that you've worked continuously at the BBA? So by now you've worked there for just over 30 years.
Yes.
And you are still employed by them, yes?
Yes.
Now, you explain in your second statement, if we bring that up, page 2, paragraphs 4 to 6. So it's BBA, yeah. So you begin explaining from paragraph 8 onwards, the different positions that you've held at the BBA. And I just want to run through those with you now. So between 1989 and 98, you were a project manager managing product assessments. Is that right?
Yes.
So that was a job like that carried out by Mr. Gregorian and Miss Amoroso, is that correct?
Yes, dealing with different product areas, but the principles were the same.
Yeah. And then if we move down that page to the next paragraph, to paragraph 9. you then tell us that between 1998 and 2002, you were a senior inspector responsible for carrying out audits of client manufacturing facilities based on the BBA quality plan and producing reports on the same for consideration by project managers at the BBA's head office. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that was a surveillance role, is that right? You conducted audits of production, yes?
Yes.
And then right at the bottom of that page and then on to the next page, you explain between 2002 and 2003, you were a project manager, but for a different department to the one above. Can you just explain what department were you a project manager in during that short period?
At that time, the BBA had a number of small assessment organisations or sections. Specifically, the materials department had two different teams. I began working for the first of those teams, and when I returned to the office, I worked for the second of the two materials teams.
Yes, so was the first team the engineering department and then you moved to the materials department?
Now, at this time, the structure of the organisation was different. There were 6 different teams. 2 were described as materials, 2 as physics, and 2 as engineering broadly.
I see. Yes.
So I worked entirely in the materials team.
I see, yes. And just to be clear, Mr. Gregorian, he was in one of the engineering teams. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
So you weren't in the same team as him?
No.
And then between 2004 and 2009, if we go back over the page to page 3, you were what's called a section head. And you tell us in that paragraph 11 that you were responsible and you had overall technical and operational control over a department, and that was the materials department. Is that correct?
It was one of 2 materials departments, yes.
I see. And what did work in that materials department cover? What did it relate to?
There were a variety of materials, primarily coatings, damp-proofing materials, and broadly speaking, something that didn't conveniently fit in another department within the organisation.
Right, yes. And had you specialised at that point in the materials department because of your background as a chemist?
Yes.
Yes. And did the materials department have anything to do with the certificates for the K15 product, the Kingspan product?
No.
And just to be clear, that was not the department that issued the 2008 BBA certificate for the Rainabon panels, was it?
No.
No. And then you go on in paragraph 12 and tell us that between 2009 and 2013, your role was as a technical manager. And is it right that in that role, you were responsible for the technical content and correctness of all BBA policies and publications, including certificates? Is that correct?
I was responsible for the policies, procedures and principles. The contents of individual certificates were the responsibilities of the heads of approval.
I see. And who were the heads of approval at that time between 2009 and 2013?
From memory, I think Chris Hunt and Brian Chamberlain.
Yes, thank you. And then between 2013 and 2019, you tell us at paragraph 13 that you became head of approvals for construction products. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was this construction products a new department of the BBA at that time?
I'm trying to remember. It was an established department, I believe. I took on the responsibility for that team because the previous head of approval had left the BBA.
I see. Now, is it right that in that role you were responsible for the technical content of all the certificates that the department issued? yes?
Yes.
And would that department, the construction products department at that time, have been responsible for the second review of the Reynabond certificate that was carried out between 2013 and 2015?
No, the Reynabond certificate belonged in the engineering department.
I see. So the construction product department was separate by this time from the engineering department, yes?
Yes, at this point there were two teams, construction products that I led and an engineering department that Brian Chamberlain led.
I see. And then finally, in terms of your role, you've told us in your statement that since 2019, you have been the BBA's Chief Scientific Officer. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is this right that you've continued to maintain responsibility for the technical content of all certificates issued by the Construction Products Department? Is that right?
Yes.
Now, in any of your roles, were you required to have any technical knowledge on the subject of fire performance and the testing and classification regimes which applied for fire?
Yes.
If so, did you have a good working knowledge of, let's start with, say, reaction to fire testing under the BS 476 regime?
The BBA is not a fire laboratory. We do not carry out fire testing. We take the results of UCAS accredited fire tests produced by other organisations and assess them against the requirements of the documents supporting the national building regulations. So we have a narrow field of expertise.
I see. So in terms of my question, if I could ask it again, did you have a good working knowledge of reaction to fire testing under the BS 476 regime? I appreciate you're not doing the testing yourself, but did you understand that those test standards under that 476 regime?
I understood that those tests would produce classifications and could interpret those classifications in the context of the approved document. Yes.
Right, thank you, yes. And what about reaction to fire testing under the European classification regime, the EN 13501 regime? Again, could you understand those tests and understand the classifications that were produced pursuant to that regime?
Yes.
And what about large-scale testing to BS 8414 parts 1 and part 2? In the roles that you've performed, have you been familiar with that testing regime?
With the constraints previously expressed, yes.
Would you say that your knowledge had evolved over time? Was there a time when you were less familiar with fire performance issues and then a time when you became more familiar with them? How has your knowledge evolved?
I was involved in the interpretation of fire test data from almost my first employment at the BBA. Clearly, over time, that knowledge has broadened, I hope, and deepened as I have dealt with many test reports over that period.
Yes, I see. So I think it follows, it would be right, wouldn't it, that from the very first role you were carrying out as project manager, you were required to interpret fire test data as a active project manager, yes?
Initially under very close supervision, but yes.
Yes. And I think you've confirmed already, but for the avoidance of doubt, were you familiar with the applicable building regulations in relation to fire performance and the associated practical guidance in approved document B?
Yes.
Now, if we can go to your third witness statement at this point, BBA 30107151, page 3, and look at paragraph 11. So here you're dealing with the training of new staff and training hours per year. And beneath that, you have set out helpfully for us in a table training that employees of the BBA have undertaken over different years. Now, we can see that your name is in the very first row, and we can see that for 2008, you say you undertook 124 hours, is that correct, of training?
Yes.
And then after that, we see just NA, the acronym NA, and you explain on page 4, if we just go over to page 4, underneath the table, it says NA indicates that the staff member was not required to complete timesheets. So if we can just go back to your line, we can see that from 2009 onwards, you weren't required to keep a record. Is that right?
Yes, staff in senior management's position were not required to complete timesheets. That was the period at which I became technical manager.
When you say that was the period at which I became technical manager, I'm not quite clear what you mean by that.
I think in 2009, I was appointed technical manager.
Yes.
That was considered a sufficiently senior role that it did not require weekly timesheets to be completed. In the absence of a weekly timesheet, I don't know how many hours I would have worked in terms of training for the remaining period of my employment.
I see. Did you in fact undergo training during that period, 2009 through to 2017?
Yes.
But is this right, that you weren't required to keep any record or log of that training because of the seniority of the position you held, yes?
It is not specific to the training, it's across all activities carried out during the working day.
Yes, but I think it follows that because of the seniority of the role that you had, you weren't required to keep a log of, for example, training records, yes?
I keep CPD records as part of my fellowship with the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining, but that does not translate into BBA records.
Yes, so the BBA as an organisation did not require you to keep a training log of the training that you'd undertaken, yes?
Not in terms of timesheets completion. There would be records of training in terms of courses attended, certificates of attendance, that type of thing. This is purely based on timesheet bookings.
Right, I see. During that period, can you help us, 2009 to 2017, did you yourself undertake training on fire testing or fire classifications and performance?
Yes.
And what about building regulation relevant to fire? Did you undertake training during that time on that topic?
There would be self-training and discussions with colleagues, no formal training courses that I'm aware of.
So when you say there would be self-training and discussions with colleagues, is that on-the-job training about building regulation relevant to fire?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we could look at your third witness statement, yes, in this statement, we go to page 2 now and look at paragraph 7. You say this, you say, in addition, the BBA provides formal training by way of presentations by experienced staff on relevant technical subjects. A senior BBA project manager also fulfills the role of technical coordinator fire, and she and the BBA senior scientist have made a number of presentations to project managers on fire-related issues with respect to product certification. And then you say, I exhibit copies of these presentations and associated papers in your JA28 exhibit. Now, I want to take this in stages. You say there that there is a technical, in the third line, a technical coordinator fire, and that she gave presentations on fire-related issues with respect to product certification. Who was that technical coordinator for fire?
Nisha Sharma.
And did you attend the presentations that she gave?
I would have helped her to prepare them. I would have attended as well, I believe.
And when was that role created? When did Nisha Sharma begin that role of technical coordinator fire?
I would guess perhaps 8 or 10 years ago. That is a guess.
I see. So as early as 2011, you think she might have been in position?
On reflection, probably slightly later than that, perhaps 2014, of that order.
Mr. Gregorian gave oral evidence last week. That was at day 105, and he explained that during the time that he was employed at the BBA as a project manager, there was no internal fire expert within the BBA. That's at day 105, page 11, lines 5 to 6. Now, is he right about that? That at the time he was employed, so 2004 to 2010, there was no internal fire expert within the BBA?
I would say that the technical manager at that time, Brian Haynes, had a very good knowledge of fire in the context of what the BBA does. I don't think he would regard himself as an expert in the context of the type of experts who have presented evidence to this inquiry, but he was expert within the boundaries of the BBA's activities.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to ask you some questions about Mr. Haynes in just a moment, but just in terms of the bigger point, I think it follows from your answer that it's right that between 2004 and 2010, there was no appointed in-house fire expert within the BBA. Is that correct?
There was no formal job description of that type, no.
And in terms of later, is it your evidence that Ms. Sharma is the in-house fire expert for the BBA?
We still have no defined in-house fire expert. I and colleagues have a good understanding of the principles that the BBA works to with respect to fire. We have external contacts to whom we can go if the knowledge we require is outside of our experience.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to come on to those external contacts in a moment, but I'm focused at this time on the BBA's in-house expertise. Mr. Nkomo said during his oral evidence that during the last few years, there had been a technical excellence team consisting of John Denyer and yourself, who he could go to for fire guidance. That's how he described it. He said it wasn't expertise, it was guidance. Is he right about that? Has there been a technical excellence team consisting of yourself and Mr. Denyer who were there for the giving of fire advice?
The technical excellence team extends beyond John Denyer and me, but it is correct that John and I give guidance on fire matters.
Yes, and over what time period have you been doing that? Mr. Nkomo said during his evidence that it was just during the last few years that had happened. Can you help us? How long has that technical excellence team been available to give fire guidance?
John Denyer has provided scientific consultancy within the BBA from, I believe, around 2002 onwards. He is a building physicist, not a fire expert. It's a small organisation. The technical staff will discuss with each other any aspects that require input from other people. I've been working with fire since 1989. Clearly, I have built up my knowledge and expertise over that period of time. There was no one point at which I became, as you put it, an expert. It's an evolutionary process.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Nkomo said that the two of you, including Mr. Denyer, could be consulted for fire advice before that time, although he made clear that that was not routine. Is that right?
Yes.
And he said that between 2010 and 2015, project managers would normally ask one another for fire advice, or possibly Brian Chamberlain, I think he was the head of approvals before you. Again, is he right about that, that between 2010 and 2015, project managers would normally ask one another for fire advice, or possibly Brian Chamberlain?
These individuals worked in a different department. I'm not sure what the normal activities would be on a day-to-day basis. Within my team, my project managers would ask me about fire.
Right. And when the role of technical coordinator for fire was created, you think your best guess is around 2014, that's Miss Nisha Sharma. Can you explain why did that change occur? Was there a particular trigger for the role of technical coordinator fire being appointed in the BBA?
Yes, Mrs. Sharma does not normally give detailed fire advice. She is a coordinator, as the title suggests. It was put in place, I think, around the time that we established a formal consultancy arrangement with Exover Warrington Fire. Her role was to field any inquiries and to pass them to the experts at Exover, and to distribute, as she felt appropriate, the responses we received within the whole organisation.
I see, thank you. So is her role largely administrative, to coordinate between you and Exover in terms of the obtaining of any specialist fire advice?
It's partly administrative. She also has a good background knowledge of fire, and she is aware of the answers we have previously received.
What's her training and what are her training and qualifications? Are they in fire engineering? What's her background?
She has a background as a scientist. She started work, I believe, like me in 1989 at the BBA as a project manager, and so has built up experience in the same way that I have.
So does it follow from that she doesn't have any formal fire qualifications?
No, she doesn't, as far as I know.
And was it any part of her role to actually answer fire-related queries, or was her role, as you've just described, just liaising with Exover Warrington?
If they were straightforward inquiries within her area of competence, she could answer them herself. Normally, it would be a coordination role.
Right. Now, prior to that, prior to there being, and we'll come to the formal arrangement with Exover Warrington in a moment, could it have been the case that requests for technical fire advice were referred to organisations like the BRE on an ad hoc basis?
Yes, sometimes.
Mr. Gregorian, for example, described in his oral evidence witnessing a telephone conversation between Brian Haynes and Sarah Colwell when he obtained oral advice on fire performance issues for the 2008 Rayner Bonds certificate. Now, was that the way that such fire advice was obtained at the time?
It's difficult for me to know how Brian Haynes obtained external fire advice. I would expect any advice to be documented.
Yes, that's helpful. So you would expect that any advice that was obtained from an external department to the external body to the BBA would be documented, yes?
We should have objective evidence of any conclusions we draw.
Yes. Now, we haven't found any documents showing that anyone at the BRE read the Rayner Bonds certificate in full or approved the statements made in it about the product's fire performance. Rather, the arrangement appears to have been that Mr. Gregorian, if he had something which needed to be clarified or a problem, then he would be able to refer it to the BRE for advice if necessary. Now, as far as you were aware, was that a sanctioned, approved process in, say, late 2007 when he was operating?
I believe the normal approach would be to seek advice in-house within the BBA if possible. If the information or the knowledge was not available to BBA staff, then we would seek external expert assistance.
Yes, I see. Thank you. Now, Mr. Gregorian said that he was not an expert on fire and that he had very little knowledge of fire issues at all. And he said that he would have consulted with Brian Haynes, who you've already mentioned, on the fire performance of the content of the certificate 084510, which we're going to come to. That's the Rayner Bond certificate. Now, just focusing on Mr. Haynes now for a moment, to your knowledge, did Mr. Haynes have any formal expertise in fire?
I'm not sure what you mean by formal expertise. I don't know if he had formal qualifications. He certainly had long professional experience of fire.
Based on his witness statement for the transcript, this is BBA 30100784, he appears to have been a physicist by training with particular expertise in engineering and building physics. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Was he ever nevertheless recognised by the BBA as a fire expert, an authority on fire-related matters?
There was no formal role of fire expert within the BBA. There never has been. He was recognised of having good knowledge of the areas of reaction to fire in which the BBA had an interest.
Would you have expected Mr. Haynes to have checked all of the statements about fire performance on the BBA certificate?
Mr. Haynes had authority for the entire content of that certificate. So yes, fire would be part of that certificate. So yes.
Yes, just to be clear, my question was, would you have expected Mr. Haynes to have checked all of the statements about fire performance on the BBA certificate? And your answer is yes, is that right?
Sorry, I interrupted, yes.
Great, thank you. If we can look at the oral evidence of Mr. Hunt at this point, I'd actually like to take you to this. This is from yesterday, day 108, page 131, picking it up 131 line 9. And so looking at line 9, he's asked, going back to what you said a few moments ago about Mr. Haynes and his perhaps technical expertise in 2007, when you began in your role as head of approvals, was Brian Haynes a qualified fire engineer? Do you know? And the answer is, I don't believe, I'm almost certain he wasn't. And I'd worked with Brian for many, many years, really from the start of my career at the BBA. I don't think he would ever have described himself he certainly wouldn't have described himself as a fire engineer. And I don't think he ever would have really described himself as an expert, as a fire expert, I don't think. And then it goes on. He's asked the question, is it fair for me to say then that he had fallen into that role in a way of being consulted on fire at the BBA, despite perhaps not having the qualifications to call himself an expert in that area? And then he says, yes, I believe so. I suppose as a bit of background, perhaps, I think that was something that tended, and then we go over the page, tended to happen at the BBA at that time. You know, a lot of the work at the BBA of project managers, you know, project assessors is a fairly generalist sort of role because you're looking at a wide range of performance aspects. That is the nature of BBA certificates. So you would build up expertise, you know, perhaps not formal qualifications, but certain individuals, and it wasn't a huge organization at that time, would probably be either willingly or unwillingly given the mantle of the BBA authority, if you like, on that particular aspect of performance. I think Brian, whether he wanted, I don't know whether that was his choice, but I think he ended up occupying that space. So that's what Mr. Hunt has told us about Mr. Haynes, and also how it tended to work at the BBA in terms of falling into these roles as fire expert. is he right about what he says there? Do you agree with that? Is he right about the general point he makes about how individuals at the BBA might end up building expertise in certain areas, but without formal qualifications in that role?
I think he's correct in that Brian was not a fire engineer. BBA individuals have defined competencies with our quality system, so it is controlled the areas in which we are competent to work and defined the areas that we are competent to work in. I think Brian Haynes was more experienced than Chris Hunt suggests in that sentence or a series of sentences. I know, for example, he sat on various European committees dealing with reaction to fire. So I think he had a deeper knowledge than Chris acknowledges in his statement.
Yes, but can you help us? Can you explain how someone with no formal expertise or experience in fire was checking statements on fire performance in BBA certificates at this time?
Statements related to clearly defined requirements given in the guidance to the National Building Regulations. I am very confident that Brian would be thoroughly familiar with those requirements.
I see. So are you saying that the work that the BBA had to do in interpreting fire-related data was a straightforward one? Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't want to imply that it was a casual exercise. It certainly isn't. It's very carefully controlled, but the level of interpretation made is limited given that the requirements are clearly defined in the approved documents.
I see. So yeah, you've told us the level of interpretation made is limited. Does it follow that that job of interpreting fire-related data was perceived by the BBA as a straightforward one?
Absolutely not. The limits placed on the BBA are the limits of our competence. If there are assessments or judgments to be made that go outside that competence, we are required to go outside the BBA and consult external technical experts.
Yes. Just touching on a related point to this, Mr. Gregorian told us that it was only if he had something which needed to be clarified or a problem that he would consult a fire expert like the BRE. That was day 105, pages 25 to 26. And Mr. Nakomo said something very similar, that it was only on difficult questions or things that were not clear about fire that he would consider asking an external fire expert. Now, if a project manager like Mr. Gregorian didn't know much about fire performance, can you explain how did the BBA expect him to be able to identify what the relevant questions might be on which he would need to take external fire advice?
I think Mr. Gregorian was not competent to make judgments on fire, and I think he would have gone to a competent authority, such as Brian Haynes, to make those judgments for him. If Mr. Haynes was incapable of answering the queries, then he would seek external expert advice, such as the BRE.
Right. But you see, Mr. Gregorian, who told us he was responsible for certainly doing the initial drafting of the certificate, including the fire performance section, he doesn't know what he doesn't know, does he? I know that is an informal way of putting it. So on fire issues, how would he be able to identify the questions that he needed help with if he had no expertise in fire at all?
Mr. Gregorian was the project manager. Very often carrying out a BBA exercise is a collaborative exercise within different teams. We will talk to each other. I wouldn't expect that Mr. Gregorian drafted the fire section. I would imagine that was done for him, perhaps by Mr. Haynes. I don't know, sorry, it was a different department. I wasn't involved.
I see. Mr. Gregorian explained that if he didn't think there was a problem, he would proceed to include a statement about fire performance in the certificate based on what test data the BBA had. That was at day 105, page 26, lines 2 to 8. Does it follow from that that a project manager was able to draft the fire contents for certificates, which could then be issued without any fire expert checking those at all?
All of the certificates would be checked internally and possibly externally for content.
Ms. Amoroso explained in her oral evidence that when she began working as a project manager, she had no formal fire training and was left to learn about fire performance on the job herself and by attending fire conferences and some large-scale fire tests. That was day 106, page 10, lines 9 to 11. She also said that if she needed help with fire issues, she would either speak to you as technical lead or later she would speak to Stephen Howard at the BRE. Now, was it considered acceptable for project managers at the BBA not to have a detailed knowledge of issues like fire performance?
No one coming into the BBA will have had previous experience of product approvals. We are almost a unique organisation, and we recognise that in the training we provide to our staff. It's not the case that a project manager comes in and immediately starts drafting certificates. We have a formalised training programme. We appoint a mentor to each new project manager who sits with and on a day-to-day basis discusses the content of the assessments being carried out and builds up that member of staff's knowledge. People are not allowed to draft certificates until they're competent to do so.
Can you explain why Ms. Amoroso's experience was that she was left to learn about fire performance on the job herself?
The approved documents are huge documents. There are many of them. We would not sit somebody down and talk them through the content of the approved documents when they first started. There would be an on-the-job type of training whereby where an issue came up that involved assessing the requirements of the approved documents, the mentor would then take the new project manager through those requirements. And as part of that process, we would expect the project manager to familiarise themselves with that aspect of the approved document. It's an evolutionary process. As you go through the job, you build up the knowledge required to carry out that assessment.
Right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the time now, and I think even though I'm mid-topic, we ought to break at this point.
Yes, well, that probably would be sensible. Mr. Albon, we're going to stop now so we can all get some lunch. We'll resume, please, at 2 o'clock. And I have to ask you on this and other occasions when we have a break, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it during the break. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you at 2 o'clock then, please. Thank you.